miles from Port of Spain to Middlebury. Movement matters. South America to North America, from the warmth to the cold, from here to there, movement matters. Where a single 5-hour flight has transformed my relationship to the sun, where the skin, faces, and bodies of the people are not kissed by the sun, where I have not the daily responsibility of taking care of my 4-year-old son. Those markers, Caribbean, blackness, being a mother, all intimately related to my work as a dance artist. Those shifts across geographies, space, histories, that movement, it matters. What is the matter of this movement? The physical substance, the structures and properties, the material, the situation. 21 days in which to focus on that which is now informing my process. Black Indian research, Orisha dance and improvisation and choreography, structures that support organic, fluid communities, with collaborators that have been chosen for me. A professor of history, a professor of post-colonial literature, a professor of English and American literature, also an environmentalist, academic bodies, old bodies, young bodies, sexual bodies, white bodies, female bodies, black bodies, brown bodies, queer bodies, straight bodies, male bodies, corporate bodies, colonial bodies, artistic bodies, social bodies, named bodies, clothed bodies, healthy bodies, privileged bodies, living, breathing bodies of knowledge, of histories, of spirit, of creativity and intelligence.
I traveled to Trinidad as a tourist with leisure and money. But when I was there, I thought of the 144,000 laborers from India who had come after the abolition of slavery starting in 1837 to 1917. They had been recruited to work in the sugarcane fields. Most of the people who came were men, especially at the beginning. But then the government, the British government, and the planters began to recruit women actively. The voyage was long and difficult, as was the life. I thought of them, I thought of their movement, I thought of their labor in the fields.
Where is the weight of all that carried within these bodies? And how do they move? In what rhythm? Academic temporal rhythms, sexual rhythms, gendered rhythms, cultural rhythms. How do I connect to these bodies and their rhythms?
One. Soca just give me powers. Yeah, make me jump and set free hours. Soca just give me powers. Yeah, drink me rum and share with others. Set free hours. The soca powers. It's a wonderful feeling to share with others. All my brothers, all my sisters, today we making me day. We partying sun no rain, we don't care what the people say. Once the music hit my brain, so much powers I can't explain. Until I pull a name, when the father take me away. No, no,
It all begins with the sun. That's where our energy comes from. Sunlight comes down through the air. It hits the surface of the waters, in the warm waters of the Caribbean or the cold waters of the North Atlantic, or the fresh waters, over-nutrified waters of Lake Champlain. And it penetrates into the water column, and all the little life forms begin to move. The phytoplankton photosynthesize. The marine microbes start to wiggle and jiggle. The zooplankton feed on the phytoplankton, and through every trophic level, the energy moves. That's our most basic community. One marine microbe, Prochlorococcus, produces over 20% of the Earth's atmospheric oxygen, which is what makes it possible for us to breathe.
It all begins with the sun. Even here in Middlebury, and of all months, January, in the midst of all this bright white snow, it all begins with the sun. Fernando shares a story by the Brazilian writer Machado de Assis with its characters named Clara, bright, and Canjinho, white, nevish, snow. He shares another story.
Bovicencio was a slave, but his children, they could be free. But his owner would not let them go free. The master sold them. Bovicencio went mad. He killed his wife, and he chopped his hand off. People wouldn't let him kill himself. he was just mad. His granddaughter, she was very little when he died, but she too, she would keep her arm behind her back.
Transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. Memories, environments, experiences, events, movements that took place well in the past, manifesting in the bodies of people here today. What histories live in these bodies? What movements have defined them? What are their inheritances? And more so, how do I connect? How do I make contact? How do I touch it? Move it?
Cultures in contact, really cultures in conflict. Banging, clashing, butting heads, but absorbing, melting. Bodies in motion. Europeans, Africans, Native Americans, touching, embracing, sometimes lovingly, yielding beautiful brown bodies throughout the Americas. Mestizos, red and white. Mulattoes, black and white. Zambos, red and black. Zambo, black Indians. Where do they belong with their in-betweenness? Their bodies matter. It's not what they say, it's what they do, yes? There was once a proud warrior named Shoe Boots, a Cherokee warrior, who once took a wife from Kentucky, a very little pretty white girl, almost a child, and they had 3 mestizo children between them. And in Cherokee country, these children were treated as royalty, because their whiteness mattered. Oh yes, the Cherokees consider themselves one of the 5 civilized tribes. But Clorinda, the pretty white girl from Kentucky, grew tired of Cherokee country and wanted to go home to Kentucky. So she took her mestizo children with her. And there, they were treated as dirt. Shoe Boots, now wifeless, heirless, decided to take for his wife his slave doll. And they had several beautiful Zambo children. But in Cherokee country, the Zambo children were treated like pariahs, because the Cherokees feared that blackness would contaminate their blood, contaminate their bodies. And to this day, the descendants of Shoe Boots and Doll are still not recognized as Cherokee. Their bodies matter. All bodies matter. So who gets to decide?
So, yeah, movement matters. There was so much more to this group work during the residency that did not make its way into this performance. With William Hart, who left us off where we started, who says, right? It's not what you say, but what you do that confirms you. I was able to continue my ongoing research of Black Indian culture and its masquerade tradition in Trinidad and Tobago. Bill offered generous readings, photographs, and videos on his Black Indian New Orleans research, which was incredibly valuable in deepening my own inquiry into a polyculturalist framework that reminds us that culture is not hermetically, spatially, nor temporally sealed, but interactive, vast, and without boundaries, only centers. In exactly 1 week, I'll be back in Trinidad to embody this research through Carnival, and it was a true gift to have the time to do this research while here. And also, with more time, Andrea and Alvin, sorry, my computer's crazy. I'll just show it this way. I'm going to read the snow image that Andrea shared with us. Big little transition. And also with more time, Andrea and Alvin will have a voice in the performance. This is where we are in the process right now. I entered this space quite open to the process, the possibilities of what could happen here. I was even more open to the honesty of the context, space, and situation that would choreograph my own movement through the space. So, what does that mean exactly? For me, it was juxtaposing the lack of diversity, comparing it to Trinidad certainly, which can result in stares, in you being seen, with having to ask, have you seen me, when someone you sat elbow to elbow with, had dinner with, and lengthy conversations with confuses you the next morning, with the only black female professor on the entire campus. So you're moving between visibility and invisibility. Or the person who during a master class, my master class, came from an office far, far away to interrupt, to request that I lower the music because it was disturbing her. That exchange or movement, as we name social interactions in Trinidad, informs the daily performative processes in our lives. I speak of this to demonstrate the very real structures, some perhaps based on social markers that can choreograph movements in a space, and the intellectual with that choreography. What does it perpetuate? Why does that movement matter? How can we push the content of that movement beyond mere stuff that happened to a meditation on space, context, purpose, and platform? How can the space remain open to the possibilities coming out of that meditation without being exposed as hollow? Not about rhetoric, but about movement that matters. Dr. Nanya Chatterjee, my colleague and noted dance scholar, reminds us that performance is a state of reality. Our performance today was grounded in the situations, conversations, experiences of this month-long residency. Through performance, we explored how our personal stories become part of the artistic process, how to make a work with content that is real, who we are, where we are, how we are in a space and in relation to one another, where the logic of choreography is then a lived space, and the responsibility of the emergence of that life is shared among all the performers, me as choreographer, Bill, Andrea, Yuna, Daniel, Jonathan, Alvin, and Fernando. In linguistics, movement is a transformation in which one part of a syntactic structure is copied or displaced into a different location, creating a new structure. In music, movement is a self-contained section of an extended composition. If we consider both applications of movement, we approach a discourse where embodied activities mobilize ideologies. We are living in the present moment where in cities all across America, people are protesting and laying out in the street to iterate that Black Lives Matter. Why does that movement matter as we consider the ideologies of democracy and equality in which this country is founded? And how do we engage the bodies making the movement? The other day I opened the dance department's copy of Andrea Olson's Body and Earth, not surprised to find it bookmarked only to the section on the mind. Perhaps that can be perceived as information on the cultural value assignments in the space. Either way, what makes movement different from linguistics or music is that the ideology the movement produces is not a commodified product, but that which constitutes sensuous experience. And that is precisely why it's effective. We can see how the body is involved in the material circumstances of history, how the body is capable of generating ideas, of initiating and responding, and even discerning the embodied nature of cultural assumptions. Through movement, we are able to locate the weight of that history in our bodies, contextualize our present experiences, and imagine new possibilities for the future. Movement Matters offers new theoretical frameworks that expands to the conceptual and philosophical elements of the available resources. And Middlebury has tremendous resources. These are the ways that dance studies interact with contemporary intellectual practices. Our group discussed whether or not I should dance in this presentation just 2 days ago. As a dance artist, I understand that choice is not abject. Some team members admitted to a slightly selfish, desirous gaze to see me dance, to see what this body can do, and I asked why. This is a choreography residency after all. Ultimately, as you saw, I chose to dance. But designing it as a structured improvisation, I'm able to engage a choreographic and performative process that is not held by that gaze, but is politically and aesthetically emancipatory. Who knows if or what I feel like dancing once the performance begins. Furthermore, by formatting the group section without counts, without the leader, requiring the group to act in concert in order to achieve its design, we inquire into the power dynamics that might inform and sustain a non-hierarchical community. A performance that could reflect and act, talk and dance, be criticized and enjoyed, create individuality and community all at the same time. It is my hope that this presentation has illuminated our process over the last few weeks. Like the sun, though shared by our entire world, does so at different times, in different seasons, in different ways, rotating and orbiting. That movement, it matters.
You can open it up for questions or comments from the faculty.
So, yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I just want to sort of come back to 2 or 3 things actually that Makeda said, which for me sort of brought out the richness and the challenges of this workshop process. One was the whole question of movement disturbing. We see this sort of captured, very much in the moment when Makeda's masterclass was interrupted. And that brought home to me the question of this institutional context. What is possible here? What disturbs? What should disturb and how does it disturb us? And then Makeda also pointed to the fact that we all wanted her to dance. It was just such a pleasure working with her, and we wanted to see her dance. And she said this very sort of gently and subtly, but she asked us to question our own assumptions about, performing bodies, performing black bodies, what kind of labor we expect of them. I mean, this is something I think about all the time in my own research and teaching, and yet it was a very sort of unthought out desire that, made me ask Makeda that question. So what I really valued about, it was just such a pleasure and opened up so many possibilities to me, but that the kinds of challenges that we think about race, about histories of dispossession, about capital, are asked to question as even with some sort of self-consciousness about these issues.
Yeah, a couple of things. I'll echo what Yumna said. It was just wonderful working with Makeda this month. I guess the most primary thing I was reminded of is that the body isn't just a shell. It's comprised of sensi. And so in this particular team, that came very clear to me when she had us learn how to chip. You saw that part where we were sort of dancing, scuffing our feet like this. We really had to make contact with the floor. We had to feel it. So the sense of touch was so important. The sense of sound. Our bodies moved differently depending on what she played. And that was such a joy for me to experience and recognize. So all the senses in some way or another came to play in this workshop. Also with my own work, I study bodies in motion, cultures in contact, and I'm reminded of with this workshop, spaces that brown bodies are permitted and not permitted to occupy, and how they move through space. Some of my work has looked at mazeways in New York City in the 18th century where slaves were allowed to live in one place, travel to another place, etc. I told a story to some of my workshop about how breakdancing got started in the 1820s, where freed black men would take boards about the size of 4 by 8 down to the wharves, and they would dance on these boards and would be paid in eels and coins and fish, etc. Pretty soon, Irish immigrants caught on too. They would bring boards also, and there would be a dance-off. And whoever gave the best performance got the most eel and coins, etc. So bodies in motion, movement, dance, competition, in space, different bodies of color. I think this workshop reminded me of all of these issues, so I thank her for that.
Are there questions for Makeda?
I felt you. I'm like, Fernando wants to talk.
No, it's just that going back to what Iruna was saying, and I've learned a lot, also from Susan in terms of, able bodies and not so able bodies, and then the whole discussion in terms of, whether she should be doing the solo or not, right? And then to me, I was one of the first. Please. But then it was interesting to see how Makeda was able to make us also question a little bit in terms of who are the able dance bodies, right? Because I almost think of myself, I am not, one of the able bodies here, right? But then, that gets broken, and it also gets broken because she used our movements in her own solo, right? So it's almost like we are all, kind of conflating our bodies, and we are, passing movement from one to the other, and then we are, in a sense, almost like, breaking the body limits and dancing, one piece, right? So that was lovely.
Question? I just want to say one quick thing. Hold on to that question. Reformulate it. Live with it for a little bit. I just want to go back to reiterate this issue of Makeda's decision to dance, because it really prompted some serious thinking, and I was right with Fernando, really desperately wanting Makeda to dance, largely for an intellectual reason, which is that my overwhelming experience of this, I think it was a workshop, has been of movement as interpretation, interpretive practice. And so I'm stunned that we were actually able to dance all together. And it's because of the open way that Makeda, I think, did all kinds of things, including modeling movement as interpretation for us. And so when she picked up on the motif from Fernando's story of the severed hand, or the hauling on a line, which is a big part of my life, and really kind of showed me how to haul on a line without a rope present, I found myself learning from her interpretation of Fernando, of me, of Yuna, and the rest. And the other thing that came out along those lines is that I was struck by how all our different monologues emphasize embodied interpretation. And so the physical context of the story of shoe boots, the physical context of the story of Afro-Brazilian slave experience, all of that really came out for me. And one last disclaimer, I am nothing like a marine ecologist, but somehow Makeda was able to make that monologue meaningful for me to perform, even though I'm a literature scholar. So there's a multiplicity of kinds of movement, but they're all circling around this notion of movement as interpretive practice.
Yes.
Hi, so I was really interested when you spoke about kind of activism and the Black Lives Matter movement, and kind kind of like using bodies to disturb, to disrupt what needs to be disturbed and disrupt. And so I guess my question is about student activism on campus and the way that students organize and try to disrupt, and then also I think to be able to do that in a way that's meaningful across faculty, across staff, is like reaching out to each other and looking at ways that our bodies fear our ability to disturb and to disrupt and to question. And like how, like I think that we need support from faculty and from staff in a way that's egalitarian and among all of our bodies together, and what we can learn from each other in that support. So I guess how do you see this research, I guess like asking some of those questions or possibilities for collaboration across students, staff, faculty, etc.?
Well, I mentioned it in the context of that whole sort of lecture. You know, this work wasn't about activism necessarily.
Right,
What I'm trying to impart that is just by just the standing in the room, how that could have meaning, that how that can have an action just by your presence. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to, go at that a bit? You do?
Quickly. I'm not sure, this is a tangential response, but the fact that you have all these professors, all of us middle-aged professors dancing to Trinidadian, tradition, an Afro-Caribbean tradition, I think is significant. And so the specificity, the historical and cultural specificity of what we were doing felt meaningful to me in this context, the I Can't Breathe context.
I think it's also interesting that, by going through this process, you start to, I guess, pay attention to what you wouldn't pay attention otherwise, right? So when you were speaking, and perhaps I'm just reading too much into what you were saying, but it caught my attention that you were saying in a meaningful way, right? So why this preoccupation with a meaningful way? What would be the not meaningful way, right? So I guess once you really put your body to work, then you start, questioning this sort of assumptions. How could it be not meaningful?
I think that's also tied again to how the piece starts, which is that it's not what you say, it's what you do. You can say anything, you can have any feeling, and then when you are in the space with others, how you interact really is the matter of the whole thing.
Well, to the question of activism, again, just to reiterate that it's a question that bodies just being in certain spaces perform acts in one way or another. But what I also was struck by was that many of us bring different experiences, but different histories, personal histories, as well as histories that we work on from different places, and that sense of movement was very much part, I think, of our process. And that, it seems to me, needs to inform any meaningful activism. That is, it's not all about just organizing here and now, but having a good understanding of the kind of colonial and the histories of colonialism and capital that have brought us to where we are. So that's, what I would say about activism. The other thing that didn't make its way to the performance, we again asked Makeda how she felt about coming here, coming to the US now, in the last weeks of incredible sort of actual media acknowledgement of violence against black bodies, particularly black men. And, that was again something that wasn't explicitly addressed in the piece, but it was very much part of our conversation as well.
I was just going to say maybe faculty and staff should be required to attend one of the master classes that you and I were in. I wasn't a teacher there. We were all sort of on the same level. We were all learning, and maybe that's one place to begin.
I was just going to ask, some of you are more new to the community, and I think you three down at this end haven't spoken yet, and I was interested in hearing, first of all, I wanted to say I really appreciated how sort of overtly how explicit you were about social issues across the board and in your presentation. But I'm also interested in hearing from the three of you who haven't spoken yet about how did this workshop mediate your experience of what it's like to be at Middlebury or a part of this particular academic community, and wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
I think Middlebury could benefit from a little more Makeda. I was really struck by I didn't attend the master class, but when I heard that someone came in and found that the music was disturbing or too loud, Makeda responded with an example, in Trinidad when your neighbor is playing music loud, well, you just have to groove on with it, you have to go with it and move with it and let it become part of your community, it's a way to build community and not shut it out. And I think sometimes our disciplines are very isolated, and we could spend a little more time working together. I mean, I've made interesting connections. I perhaps seen and met a few of you, but I want to collaborate with every single person sitting up here now, and I can see how we could do that. So it's been a cool experience.
I agree with Andrea's point exactly. I hear a lot of discussion on this campus about interdisciplinary work and different departments sharing ideas, cross-pollinating, and the question becomes, okay, how does that actually happen? And this became, for me, a framework in which that could happen. Certainly the body is something that unifies us all, but also, as Dan mentioned, this definition of movement for our group became very complicated. Not just physical movement, but also transgenerational movement, epigenetics, as Fernando mentioned. Also the notion of diaspora, different locations affecting how you see yourself and your identity. And that became very interesting for me because I find myself here at Middlebury for a finite amount of time, and yet I've changed my identity a little being here. So that has been a very interesting experience for me to be conscious of as well.
We're not laughing at you. It's inhuman. Yes, is there another question? We have about 2 more minutes. Albany, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go, Albany. Go.
Well, I think that my experience with this group has been phenomenal, and it's been wonderful. But I think that when I approached the collaboration, there was the question and the assumption that we were supposed to do something on race for obvious reasons. And I think that was interesting, like when we had our conversations about what does it mean for Makeda's black body to perform, and like what labor are we like exploiting from it. But also just how do we negotiate questions of what's happening in Ferguson? Are we supposed to own that and like process that, because we have so many brown bodies on our group. So is that like the work that we're supposed to do? And is it relegated to us to do that work, and are we responsible? So I think as someone new to Middlebury, it's an interesting question, like, do the brown bodies have to do diversity work here, and what does that look like, and how does it interact with art and aesthetics? Like, are they racialized themselves? And so I think that was like a fascinating experience for myself. I fell prey to racial ignorance and making faux pas and things like that. And Makeda was nice, she slapped you back if you did that. She did a monologue too.